Why does creating a pitch deck feels like running a marathon in the dark? You research endlessly, you draft for hours, and yet you are left with so many unanswered questions. The problem is most pitch decks don't fail because they are too long or too short. They fail because they don't answer three simple but critical questions. And it wasn't until I learned this that things changed. In fact, that's how I won $158,000 at a pitch competition without even having a registered company. So how do you create the perfect pitch deck structure? Well, in this video I'm breaking it down step by step, a raw and no fluff tutorial covering every essential slide with real life examples from how my own deck evolved over the last years. And at the end you will even get to see the full pitch recording from the competition. Let's start with a common mistake, not knowing what type of deck you actually need. Turns out not all pitch decks are created equal. A valuable lesson I learned from my coaches who have worked years for firms that have invested in multiple unicorns is that there are three types of decks which you use in three distinct scenarios. A teaser deck with just a few slides designed for people who have never heard of you, that receive tons of decks and spend very little time reviewing them. A full reading pitch deck that is sent to people after an initial conversation or interest in your company/idea. This one typically includes a few more lines of text here and there, as it's meant to stand alone without the necessity of you presenting it. And finally, a deck used for in-person or online presentations or even pitch competitions. It serves as a visual guidance and it's complementary to what you say. Now, if this sounds overwhelming, bear with me. I'm going to show you how to create a hybrid structure that works for both reading and presenting. It evolves around three pivotal questions every investor cares about, each supported by its own set of slides. Let's begin with the first question, the backbone of your pitch deck. What is the opportunity? And let's break it down slide by slide. Starting with the most obvious but overlooked one, during presentations the intro slide is the one you see the longest. So use it to explain in 5 to 8 words what your company does. Keep it minimal, simple, and use your brand color so that people who see it associate it with your company. Now if you don't have anything yet, here's a hack. Use ChatGPT and write an explanation of your business and ask it to give you multiple examples of 5 to 8 word explanations to help you brainstorm. Next step is to sell the problem. If the investor doesn't understand this, they also won't care about your solution. So highlight its importance by using key pain points, things like lost money, time wasters, or relatable examples. Imagine explaining this to a room of 10-year-olds, so don't use too overly technical explanations. In my early pitch decks, I made the classical mistake of trying to put everything onto one slide, until I realized to not obsess over the number of slides. In fact, my new deck uses multiple problem slides. Each one is short and still fits into a 4 to 5 minute pitch presentation. Now here's a trick to make your problem flow seamless into your solution. A storytelling technique borrowed from the movies. Have you ever noticed that they always follow a certain pattern? First they set the scene, then they introduce the obstacles, and finally they deliver the solution. Your pitch deck can work the same way. The first of our 4 problem slides sets the scene with a general statement to provide context. Then the next slides name the obstacles, the clear specific pain points. And finally we transition seamlessly into the solution slide, the resolution. Now when it comes to the solution slide, try to answer the problems you introduced. You can use visuals like product mockups or screenshots or highlight things that make your solution unique. Overall, the goal is to make it simple, relatable, and to quickly explain in a short and abstract way how your product is part of the solution. Now looking at the first solution slide, you can see that we start with a very simple statement. Afterwards we use contrast to basically highlight the difference between using our solution or not using our solution, as you can see right here. We have a bit more of a complicated images here and here, in case someone sits in the audience or is looking at the pitch deck that is a bit more knowledgeable about the market, but we complement it with very simple explanations, basically just saying that we have an apartment that costs 100 euros. In the current market it's sold for 130, and we, with our solution, can use that same apartment of 100 euros per night and we sell it for 105. And basically all that money gets lost here in the middle. That's how we explain it, and we use complementary slides to just bring the point home and show how it's possible. We explain that this is the reason why we have the possibility to have housing options around the world, and we quickly mention that we have an up and running and developed platform without going too much into detail. Let's talk about the market slide. Don't overcomplicate this. Take some time to figure out what the size of your market and its yearly growth is. You can use standard methods like TAM, SAM, Now the key thing here is that the investor will use this slide to determine your ambition and whether the market is worth pursuing. If the market is too small, they might not want to take that risk, especially if there is considerable competition, as there is only so much that you can take from a market. And here's a tip, if you're dealing with venture capitalist firms, look into their fund size. Why? Typically VCs, they select a startup that if successful can bring them 10 times more than their actual fund size. This allows them to invest in 10 startups, knowing 9 might fail and the one which succeeds could make up for all their losses. If your market size does not support that kind of return, it might be a deal breaker. Now, whatever numbers you put here, just make sure you have a story to back them up. And definitely know your numbers in case the question comes up, because usually it will. And by the way, if you join my community down below, I'm happy to chat and give you additional guidance for this slide. Back in the days, we used a typical 5-year financial projection right after the market slide. But since it's often seen as fugazi anyways, I prefer to just visually showcase what the market share could translate into in the long term. For example, I focused more on highlighting the number of clients instead of the number of years it takes to get there. And also I made sure that I show an investor that I'm in it for the long term. I went as far as saying something along those lines: over the next 10 years, this is what X% market share translates into. The logical question that pops up next is, how are you going to make money? Use the business model slide to justify how your business generates revenue. If you're still figuring this part out, here's what you can do. The key here is to understand 2 core concepts: your revenue model and your pricing strategy. In simple terms, the revenue model explains how your business makes money, whether that's through subscriptions or one-time sales or even another approach. And your pricing strategy, on the other hand, determines how much you charge, for example, based on factors like brand value, competition, or market demand. Now you can read this article from HubSpot or use something like ChatGPT to help you brainstorm ideas. For example, in our own business, we use a dual revenue model. One part is subscription based with a tiered pricing strategy that scales with the number of bookings, and the second part is commission based, using a competitive pricing strategy to keep us attractive in the market. In our old pitch deck, we kept this explanation very brief and combined it with the solution slide. So that's the opportunity. We have highlighted the problem, the solution, and the potential for growth. But now we still need to answer the next big question: why now? Let's start with the traction slide. This is all about momentum and proof of execution. In our current pitch deck, I just showcase customer logos, revenue, and other important milestones relevant to our project. But what if you don't have any traction yet? So in my early pitch decks, when we had no clients yet, we used a timeline. This can include early conversations, any kind of research or interviews, and your future plans to execute on what you are trying to sell the investor to invest their money in. You can also combine this with a go-to-market slide to explain how you plan to get customers and potentially highlight any past experience to sell confidence. Bonus is if you can show any signs of proper conducted customer discovery, which I actually cover in another video on my channel that you can watch later. Moving on to the competition slide. You can obviously use a classical competitive matrix and explain your innovative angle, or potentially even show your unique selling point. But the thing is, you might not always be reinventing the wheel. Depending on your stage, you might not even have a clearly defined unique selling point yet. In this case, use this slide to explain why there is still room for you in the market. Maybe you are more cost efficient or solving the problem differently. Keep it brief, and I would use 1 or 2 sentences max. If you do decide to use the matrix, potentially include a joke, as it's always very obvious that everyone positions themselves at the top right corner. The key here is to not lose yourself in the details. It's not the place to dive too deep into your product. In my old pitch deck we used something like this, and in the new one we use the matrix, even though I'm not always a huge fan of it. Now if you don't have traction yet, I just explained a few seconds ago how you can replace the traction slide with a timeline/go-to-market to show how you plan to reach potential customers. If you have traction, you can use the go-to-market slide to highlight any unique ways that you use to acquire customers or showcase a clear plan how you want to scale, potentially using phases as you can see here. Next up is the ask slide. Just clearly communicate how much you're raising and where the money will go. Keep it quick and don't overcomplicate this. Now how to exactly calculate the amount you need is a topic for another video. Now this one is optional, but if your scaling strategy is broken into phases, you can use a result slide to tie it all together. Show how much revenue or growth phase 1 could actually achieve if fully funded. It's a quick way to leave investors with a clear idea of the potential upside. Now for the final and arguably most important question, why are you the right person or team to bring this vision to life? Common things investors love to see is relevant experience and proven expertise. But what if you don't have a team yet? There are 2 things you can do. First, do what I did early on. My pitch deck wasn't just a tool to secure funding. I actually used it to help me convince people to join me on this journey. Second, when talking to investors at that stage, sell yourself and show that you are fully aware of the fact that you need to build a team. Talk about the steps you are already taking to recruit the right people. Finally, wrap it up with boldness. Try to leave a lasting impression with your outro slide. Include your contact details and have one clear call to action, whether it's scheduling a follow-up meeting or moving forward with an investment discussion. Now, I have 2 quick bonus tips for you. If you're sending out your pitch deck to someone, use a tool like DocSend. It lets you track how much time they spend on each slide and see which parts of your deck capture their attention or even lose it. Second, and this one is very important, don't ask investors to sign an NDA before sending your pitch deck. It's a major turnoff for most. And there you have it. If you structure your pitch deck around these questions slide by slide, you will tell a compelling story that hopefully won't be ignored. And as promised, here's the raw recording of my pitch at the startup competition. Watch it and keep in mind that the sole purpose of this is inspiration and to show you the evolution, as this was one of the very first pitches a couple years ago and it is very far from perfect.